Okay. Well, that took a while. I'm surprised. Anyway, welcome everybody today. I'm just gonna. I think everybody, you're at this point, you're seasoned pros, so I'm just gonna quickly go through how you use the chat box in case we have to mute. Seems kind of quiet now, but if in case we have a problem. So what you're going to see on the top of your screen are these icons. This is just a picture of them. You're going to select the one that looks like a cartoon bubble. And then you're going to get a box that looks like this. And you're going to type here. Okay? So, I'm still letting people in, so that's why, sorry for the slight delay. I'm going to open a PowerPoint. Okay, so as is usual, bigger view. Okay, so before we start, if you could all put your name and where you're from in the chat box, that would be helpful. Then I know you all know how to come. I've still got a lot of people coming in. Okay, so we are getting a little background noise, so it looks like everybody's got the hang of this, so I'm going to mute. If you have any questions, you need to go over anything again, just put the question in the chat box, and I'll try to answer it. I have no problem doing things, over and over again. So let me ask the question I asked before everybody came in. How many of you are familiar with conditional formatting? I'll try to keep the questions so simple. Yes or no? If you've heard of it or used it, just say yes. If you haven't, just put no. Oh, interesting. So mostly no. Some yeses. Okay. So we're going to start by taking a look at conditional formatting, and that'll probably be at least half of this session. In our first session we did it was sort of a tips and tricks, so I covered a lot of ground. Here in these additional sessions, we're kind of going to drill deeper down into each thing we do. So I'm going to probably give you the simplest example. This is just kids' test scores. And I probably want to start just by talking for a minute about conditional formatting. Excel is both a visual tool and an analytical tool, or a presentation tool, and how you present data can be very important. And I know that sometimes you think of that as I'm presenting data, maybe if I have to do a public meeting, but actually it's part of the process of analysis. When you show a lot of numbers to people, it just kind of, it just seems to dance on the, kind of just dance around on the stages, so to speak. So creating some color or imaging that makes it clearer what the data means can actually lead to meaning and understanding. And as we'll see later, it can also be used for even with people in finance to kind of help you spot some problem areas that might not jump out at you otherwise. So let me start just by highlighting the data, which as you see are basically test scores. Okay. And conditional formatting is on your home, it's on the home ribbon. So you're going to go to conditional formatting here. You have a lot of options. We're going to look at highlight rules first, okay? And those rules are, if you have a lag, I'd suggest logging in and out. Every once in a while that happens. Anybody else getting a lag? Just come back in, Joanne. Okay? All right, so let's go again to conditional formatting. So we want to go to highlight rules. And among the highlight rules, those are all like logical rules. So they're then greater than, less than, between two amounts, equal to. We're going to look at greater than. Well, you could do either greater than or less than. So I'm actually going to do greater than, and I'm going to tell you something that makes no sense at first until I do it. But if you do greater than, you want to start with your lowest band. If you do less than, you want to start with your highest band. And that's going to make sense in a minute, okay? So I'm going to go to greater than, and I'm going to basically pick. Now, I could put this in as a percent because I have percents on my screen, but I'm just going to use decimals because I can kind of switch between the two pretty simultaneously. Joanne, let me know if you're still getting a lag. Okay. So I mentioned I'm going to start with my lowest band. So what I want to do is I want to look at all scores that are greater than, say, 70 or 60. Actually, I'll do 69. So 70 would be included, greater than 69. And what you're going to notice is I have two bands now because I have my red band and I have my white band. So all the scores above 69, greater than 69, are going to be in red. Why I mentioned that you want to start with your lowest band is the band's over right. So I can come back in again and do again pick greater than, and you got to make sure you change the formatting because otherwise you're not going to see any difference. So this time I'm going to do light red, I'm going to do yellow. I'm going to do, yellow fill with dark yellow text. And that I'll do for anything less than, greater than, say, 84. And so now you see I have my data in 3 bands. And now I can even do one more band. Go to conditional formatting. Go to greater than. I got to make sure I don't use any of the ones I used before. Okay? And this time I'm going to do anything over 90. And now I have it. I'll make it bigger so you can see it. Maybe not that big because then you can't see all the data. Now I have all my test scores divided up by color. Okay, by these bands, okay? So that's a way of presenting the data. And this is dynamic, meaning that once you do the conditional formatting, if the data itself changes, that will be reflected in the band. So you could have, for example, this all set up, and now as you're plugging in the new data, maybe you clear your data, but you don't clear your conditional formatting, it's going to be reflected, okay? So, for example, if this score goes to 80%, it'll now be a different color. Whoops, that one. Okay, questions. You want to see it again? Yes, no? Are you alive? Okay. How many of you were familiar with that? Yes, you can, and that's actually what I'm doing next. Okay? So I'm not going to repeat it because I'm going to show it to you in a minute. Okay? So now, let me just go over a few more details on this data before we do words. So number one, if you decide you don't like it, you can clear it. And the way you clear it is, again, to go to conditional formatting and clear your rules. And I'm actually going to do it, because I'm going to do it one more time, even though you didn't request it. Okay? So I'm going to go again and look at my data. I'm going to go to greater than. Remember, actually, you know what? I'll just show you the opposite. I'm going to do less than this time. So with less than, it's really the same. Now I want to start with my highest band. So, because it's going to overwrite. So I want anything less than 90. Now I go back to my data again. Anything less than 75. Got to change to a different color. And then I'll do one more. Anything less than 65. Just make sure you keep changing colors, okay? And here again, I created bands. And this time the white is actually the highest, okay? So now does everybody understand what I mean by, if you're doing greater, you got to start with the smallest band. If you're doing less than, you want to start with your highest bands because of the way it overwrites. Meaning it won't affect the ones that are already done that are correct, but it'll overwrite as you go through each band. Okay, so a couple things. Can you, besides clearing it, can you see what you did? And the answer is yes. You can go to Manage Rules, and that will show you all of your rules. So generally it's easier at this point to take them out, but maybe later on you'll forget what you actually had as your rules, okay? So you may want to look, okay? And then make whatever changes you want to do. Now, if you notice, it gave you 3 options here, you know, on like choices, but you can certainly go beyond that and start customizing any format you want. So you can pick the border, the fill, the color. You can do any, you know, any fill color you want that you haven't picked already, and you can pick anything you want for the font. Not font type, but in terms of, you know, font style and what color you want that, okay? And so again, you know, you can pick, you're not limited to only the number of the 4 bands that are given to you, okay? All right. So the question was, I want to make sure I know who is it from. Who asked, can you do it with words? Barbara. Okay. So I'm a bit lazy here. I don't feel like doing them all because I did it already. But here's an example of doing it with words. So here I have A, B, C, D, E, F. So I need a band for each of those different letters. And if you notice, one of the options under conditional formatting, and I can just go in even though we have it already, was text that contains. And then I can just put in the text. I believe, I could be wrong on this, I believe you got to have the text under quotes. But I could be wrong. And in fact, I'm going to test it whether you really do need it or not, okay? So let's go over here, and we'll just take the letter B. I'll do conditional formatting. Text that contains, and I just want to see whether you need to put in the quotes or not put in the quotes. So the answer is you don't want to put in the quotes. Okay. There's so many different rules with Excel. So if you did it contains B, then it'll work. If it contains anything else, it won't work. But remember, you can have multiple conditions on even on one cell. Okay? Another example of this where you might want to use it is paid. Okay? So here we have a conditional formatting, or how about this one? Do. Okay? So we have a conditional formatting, again, text equals, we have the word do. So as long as it's due, it'll show up as red. The moment it's paid, it's now white. Okay? Any questions? Anything you need me to go over? So far? All right, so let's look at a few more. Okay? So I'm going to clear this. And go to my next set. Top bottom rules. Now it says 10, but you don't have to use 10. It just says 10. When you do the selecting, you can say top 5, top 3, top 20. So it defaults to 10, but you're not limited to 10. So it says here, give me I'm going to say the top 5 scores. And now it's just highlighting the top 5. Now I could come by the way, using the same data, and go in, because they're top and bottom rules, and say, give me the bottom 5 rules. Want to pick, obviously I have to pick a different band for that. So now what I have listed are my top highest ones and my lowest. And by the way, if you're doing the counting, you could have more than 5 because they're modal. If 6 of the scores were 96, or, well, actually, I'm having a word fry here for a minute. If you had more than 5, but it involved, say the 96s being 3 96s or 4 96s, you could theoretically have more than 5. If you just put one more 96 here, it would drop out the 93. But if theoretically, say, all the scores were, you had 6 people that got 98, it can't discern one 98 from another. But it's going to give you your top highest scores. Okay, any questions on that? And again, I'm going to clear it and show you a few more. And I think now that you know where they are, you'll probably find ones that I haven't even gone over. But I do want to show you these are common ones. So that was top 10. But I also can do top percent. Now, I'll let you know a little trick here. If you select it, it's really the same thing. If you hit the percent and you check percent, you get to the same thing as the previous, as selecting percent here. Okay? But let's say I want to know, the top 20%, not top 20, but the scores that are in the top 20% of the scores, my class, that's going to give me now the top 20%. So I can do top 10, I can do top 10%, bottom 10, bottom 10%. Question? Anything you want to see again? Okay, now we look at some of the weird, maybe you like it, but I think they're a little strange, but, everybody's different. Well, let me stop. How many of you were familiar with this? Those who even knew conditional format, did you know this? Okay, all right. So let's look at some other ones. Before we get into the really sophisticated stuff. Okay? There are some ones that are more complex, but I want to start with still pretty basic. So here's data bars. This is what I call the lazy ones. You don't have to bother with bands. And what it does is it just presents all of the data as little horizontal bar charts, with obviously this being 98, this being 65. And again, it's just another way of visually showing the data. Okay? And it's quick. Here's another one. So I'm just showing you a different color. Okay? That's just a different color of the same thing. And then you have color scales, which is, again, the lazy thing. So basically what it's doing is it's selecting the bands for you. It's looking at your data set and it's saying, let me pick all the bands and I'll just create some. They're not random, but I'm going to, basically bring up my data into about 5 different bands, and that's how it's going to work, okay? So, if you don't want to bother to set it yourself, you can kind of let it select. This next one, really strange. Icon sets. So I'm going to show you one I actually kind of like. Most of them I don't. But they're like little fuel cages, like you see on your cell phone. Or bars on your, you see when you're getting your bars of how good a signal you have, okay? So you can have that kind of a bar next to the data, okay? Or here's a few more. I don't know. A little like pie charts. I think you get the idea. You can look at all the choices you want, okay? Now, practical uses. Let's look at, this is kind of just a little bit of a, in the kind of table I showed you up top, the icons don't really look that good. But, if you're looking at like what percent of our, of our resources are given to each item, this might, make for a nice presentation, or having little pie charts. Okay? So, it can be nice for certain things. Again, I just have another data set. Let's say I'm a business, and I want to, I just want to get a sense of like what are my highest selling items. This is, you can see this is, it looks like someplace in, I don't know what it is actually, because of different kind of foods. Okay, but I have a restaurant, and these are my revenues for the month or for a few months. And I just want to have an idea of like what are my biggest sellers, where am I making my most money on them. So again, I'll go to top bottom rules, and I'll just maybe pick my top 10. And now immediately it's jumping out at me, these are the sellers. These are the items that sold the most by quarter, okay? Or maybe I just wanted to do it for the 1 quarter. Just look at my data for the 1 quarter. Or have each be a different data set. So let's say I would do this, do top bottom rules. Here I'll just do my top 5 or top 3. And then I can do the same thing, just a separate data set. So it's not giving me top 3 of the whole, it's giving me by quarter. So I could fill in the rest, but you get the basic idea. These are my big sellers. Curry chicken seems to be big at least for the first 2 quarters. Must be a big seller. Okay? But, it just allows you to see the data differently. Questions? All right, so this one wasn't in the template. I was fiddling around this morning. It's in the one I just sent you. It wasn't the original one you got. So actually it is in the template. Okay? So I have to include something in here that's a little over your pay grade, but I promise you that by the time we hit the next webinar, you'll know how to do what I'm going to show you. Okay? So I had this recently. This came up. I was doing work for a school district in New York, and they have a per diem for meals. But the per diem is based on, and that's their rules, their policy rules. They're based on what state you had the meal in. So they go by whatever those states said as their per diem rules. Each one of the states has for their own government their rules on how much they will reimburse people. So rather than just have this particular school district's rules, they're actually working off the different states. Now, this data is made up, so it's just fake data. I don't really know what their per diems are. But they actually had them for all the states in their area, and actually some far away. They had Hawaii, because apparently some of their people go to conferences in Hawaii. God bless them. But anyway, so the way I have this set up is it's fairly sophisticated. Actually, you know what? I'm going to take it back. I'm not going to do that yet. I'm going to show you a simpler one first, and then I'll go to that one. So delete everything I just said for a minute. I'll come back to it. I want to give you one that's a little easier to see. Okay? So here we have one of the things that you have as an option under conditional formatting. Okay? Is actually more rules. There are more rules. And one of the rules is use a formula. So you can create a fairly sophisticated conditional formatting, and that's what I've done here. So I'm actually gonna show it to you so you can see it. Okay? Because it's in here. So there's actually a formula here. And what the formula is, I wrote it down below so you could see it. Okay? So I'll tell you what the rule is. It says, under the contract, that as an employee, you get free life insurance. But you only get it to 10% of your salary. So if you make $60,000, you can get an insurance policy, a term insurance policy, of $600,000. That's not the premium. That's what it pays if you croak, whatever. But it's, pardon me for being a little non-diplomatic there. But anyway, that's what you get. That's the face value, okay? If you want anything beyond that, you got to pay for it. You can do it, but you don't get it for free, okay? So what I have here is, and I'll just show you the formula. It says look in this cell, and then take the amount of the salary and times it by 10. If what you're requesting is less than that, you'll get the insurance. If it's greater than that, it's going to alert you by giving you a color. Okay? So watch what happens here. So if the request is for, say, $600,000, shows up clear. Even $650,000. But if I go above that, it's going to get highlighted. So the theory is, if I had this all set up, and I had people requesting, it would immediately alert you and them that you had exceeded this rule. So you can do conditional formats that return based on the result of a calculation. I understand this isn't for everybody, but this isn't terribly complicated to do. Okay, so let me just stop. Any questions on that? And as to how you do it, I can show you how you do it. Basically, you're going to go into conditional formatting, you're going to go to more rules, and you're going to say use a formula, and you're going to enter your formula. So I could do it here again. I could repeat it. I don't know that you need me to do that. In this case, it would be L8, L40 equals L40 is greater than L40, nope, K40 times 10. Now, if there's an amount here, if I did it right, now we'll see if I did it right. Nope, must have made an error. But you get the idea. I'm not going to bother debugging it now. Okay, any questions? It's probably a mistake I made. All right, so you want to see one more? Yes, no, before we go to logical operators? I'll go back to I don't know if you're with me, that's why I keep asking. Okay, all right. So I don't have to repeat the whole story again. So these are the per diems. So this is a table, so I'm going to use VLOOKUP, okay? So basically what my formula is, and I will say, they are hard to read, so it's best that, you keep your own notes, because seeing it over here, it's a little tricky to see it once you've done it. But what I basically did here is I set it up so that based on what amount, it's going to it'll change the color if I'm over the per diem. So if I select New York and it's 35, it's fine. If I select New York and it's 40, I'm going to get the color, okay? If I select Alabama and I put in the same 35, it's gonna tell me I'm above the per diem. So it's dynamic. It's not just greater than 35. It's greater than based on what state it is. Okay. So it's a little sophisticated, but I wanted to show you that. You can kind of go pretty far on this if you want to. 90% of the people don't do that. They stick to these kinds of examples. But if you are a real Excel maven and you want to, build in a little bit of what I would call these warnings, you can certainly do that. And these formulas are not terribly sophisticated, even though I made a mistake in that one. Okay? All right. We're good? All right. So our next topic, which is what we're going to spend the rest of the time on, is logical operators. And by definition, a logical operator are any of those logical statements. Greater than, less than, equal to. I didn't give you all of them, actually. And, nor. Any of them that are going to return a true or false. Now, in Excel, if you create a formula, and this is essentially a greater than or less than formula, and the result is true, then it's gonna return a true. So if I go 11, is greater than 20, it's going to come back false because 11 is not greater than 20. If I come and I do 11 is greater than 9, now it's going to be true. So that is just automatically built in. The problem, unfortunately, is true and false aren't as instructive. So a lot of times, instead of using that, people will use an if statement. By the way, how many of you are familiar with if statements in Excel? Okay. So we're going to talk about the basic if statements, and then I'll talk about nested if statements. So here's your basic if statement. It starts with a logical operator. If some logical operator. In this case, the logical operator is an equal to. So it's just an equal to. But it could be greater than, less than, equal to. And if the logical operator produces a true, as we had up above, it's going to return the first. It's going to return the first parameter. If it's false, it'll return the second parameter. So let's look at what we have here. This is my formula. That's my if statement. And this is my input. So watch what happens. I put in 0, it comes out as a no. Why? Because it's false. It's not a 1. It says if I4 is a 1, give me a no. If I write a ball, it's going to say no. If I put in anything but a 1, it's going to say no. If I put in a 1, it's going to say yes or correct. So that's the basic format for an if statement. Okay? I'll stop. I know that may be a little confusing for some. Okay? But that's your basic if statement. Okay? So let's look at, again, simple if statements first. So here I don't have an if statement. I simply have the most basic logical operator, which is just the formula. So here was the question, can you vote? Okay? This is the age, and the voting age is 18. Okay? So if you're either 18 or over, you can vote. If you're under, you can't. Okay? So now we have some ages. We have 17. You can't vote, so that's false. You can't vote. Okay? Here, you can't vote. Here, you can vote. You get the idea. By the way, this is dynamic. So it becomes a true. So, but the problem is, all you have as choices are true or false. So a lot of times it's preference to do an if statement because you can control the answers. So here is my if statement. It's basically the same logical operator, greater than or equal to 18. It says if N12 is greater than or equal, I did this line. Obviously, each one is different. And if you can vote, it's going to say can vote. If you can't vote, it'll say you can't vote. So watch what happens as I change this. Now it becomes can vote. Now it becomes can't vote. So the major advantage to the if statement is here I'm just getting true and false. People may not understand what that means. Here I have an ability to really show, responses and to control the answers. And again, the basic syntax is logical operator. This is what happens if it's true. Logical test. Logical test. This is what happens if it's true. This is what you get if it's false. And I will tell you, if you are going to use words here, you do have to put them in quotes. Okay? All right. Let me stop. Any questions? Everybody good? Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. You can nest your if statements. And I really don't recommend, by the way, this is a little secret for those of you who are a little more advanced. I'll explain it later. But if there's one thing that I do when I come in to consult, is I'm finding these incredibly elaborate nested if statements. Like, we have 5 different bargaining units, and if you're not in this unit, then you go to this, and they work. But they're really long, and they're really difficult to debug. And if there are changes in the data, it's a monster to go fix, like if we have a change in contracts. Almost always, if I'm going beyond 2 nests, I recommend moving it to a VLOOKUP instead. And I'm not going to go into the details of how that works yet because that's another session. But once they get to be kind of elaborate, I'm almost always switching them out to a VLOOKUP, okay? But nevertheless, we're going to look at how you could nest here. And again, I'll just explain how it works. So here, depending on what number you select, it either represents your full-time, part-time, or hourly. Now, interestingly enough, even though I have 3 different choices, I only need 2 nests. Because if you're not full-time or part-time, I'm assuming you're hourly. Okay? So what I did here is just to show so you could see it. That's the formula. But I'll kind of walk you through how it works. So it says if I9 equals 1, return me, that's the true, return me part-time. If it's not, it's false, do another if statement. It's kind of an if statement within an if statement, and you're always going to end up with your nest on the falses. Because if it's true, it's just going to return the result. If it's not, it's going to go to another test. Okay? So here it says, if I9 equals a 1, give me part-time. If that's not true, do it one more time. And this time, it's going to say, if I9 equals a 2, give me full-time. If it's anything else, give me hourly, because it'll be false. So watch what happens here. By the way, if I take everything out, I'll get hourly, because it defaults to that. But if I have a 1, it's part-time. If I have a 2, it's full-time. If it's anything else, including bananas, it's hourly. Okay, so let me stop. I know it's a little bit beyond some people's pay grade, but you got the idea? So let's just look at a couple of, other examples of this. Okay. And by the way, I went over with you basic drop-downs, so I don't mind including them. So, again, I would probably do this as a VLOOKUP, but here I did it with if statements. And I'll show you the formula. So it says, if C46 equals admin. So just like with conditional formatting, I can have the equal be words. It doesn't have to be a calculation. It can be words, okay? If C46 equals admin, then give me the rate for that bargaining unit. Basically what this is each bargaining unit has negotiated I'm going to assume this is employee's contribution for medical, the percent the employee pays. So each bargaining unit negotiated a different deal, okay? So what happens is, based on the result, if it's C46 and it's the admin unit, it's going to return 006. If that's not true, it's going to do another test. And then it'll go to the teacher's unit. And that'll return 04. If it's anything else, it'll return 7. So this is a 2-nest approach. Okay? Here, I have a 3-nest approach. So you're not seeing, I'll just show, I have a 3-nest approach. So if you don't select any of them, you get a blank. See here, if nothing is selected, I get 07 because it defaults to classified. Here, it's a more elegant, but I had to add one more nest. So watch what happens. I select admin, gives me 06. I select teacher, gives me 04. Again, 2 and 3 are going to give me the same. The only difference is what happens with a blank, because I have 3 nests. And if you want to know what the third nest is, it just says if it's nothing, give me a blank. And the way you do that is with 2 parentheses. Okay? Okay, I went over that last time, but I can show you really quick how you do a drop-down. So you go to Data, Data Validation, List. And you have 2 ways of doing it. You can either do it by entering them manually with a comma separating them, Or I can have a list. Well, do something a little more interesting than this, okay? Well, you wouldn't need an if statement with the VLOOKUPs. You avoid it. You mean, can you do the equivalent of nested if statements with a VLOOKUP? Absolutely. But it replaces the if statements, the nested if statements. Okay? And that I'll have to show you next time. Okay? But yes, you can get rid of the if statements, which is much better, because if you're working off a lookup table, all you have to do is change the table. You don't have to go into the formulas. So yeah, highly recommended. So I promise I'm going to deliver on that one. But let me just go back to when I show you how to do the data validation. So here, instead of entering the items manually, I can go to the corner here and select the range. And that's how I get my drop down. Okay? So, and I'll probably elaborate on that more when we go a little deeper on data validation. Okay? All right. So, I think you get the general idea. Maybe I can show. I got a couple more minutes, so I'll show you a couple more, and then I want to show you a really cool use of if statements. This I would leave in if statements because it's actually not nested. It's really only one if statement. And it's one of my favorite uses of if statements. But I'll leave a little bit of time for it. Maybe I'll show you one more. Okay, so here, again, sales tax rates. I apologize, none of you are from Maryland or D.C., but I did a few weeks ago. I did this same training, and I just didn't change it. So I was doing folks who were in Maryland or the District of Columbia. And so they have different sales tax rates. Maryland has 6%. D.C. has 0.575. So what sales tax rate gets returned depends on what you select. So if you select D.C., you get 5.75, and then this is just calculated. Okay? If it's Maryland, you're going to get 6. Now, here's one of the things that kind of stinky about it. You know, because it's only 2, it's going to default. If you don't pick Maryland, it'll automatically default to D.C. Because it's only got one, it's only one if statement. Okay? Here I have a couple of if statements. Same thing. But if I have it blank, it's going to give me an error because it's trying to do this calculation. There's nothing here, so it gives me an error. There are ways you can eliminate the error. You can use an if error statement around the items to kind of get rid of the error. But otherwise, if you don't select any state, you're going to get an error. Okay? And it doesn't look pretty. All right. You ready for my really cool thing? Okay. This is my favorite. I learned this a long time ago. And for years I used it. I still actually use it when I get ready to do my taxes every year. Okay? So I assume you all know what a cash disbursements journal is. And if you don't, tell me you don't know what it is, because then I'll kind of explain it. How many of you know what a cash disbursements journal is? Yes? No? Okay. All right. I can explain it because it's not hard to understand. So here I have my checks. And these are the amounts. And what's meant by a cash disbursements is it's going to disperse it into the category that it belongs under. Now, this is a fairly, it's just a sample, but I might have, 10 or 12 different categories. And this isn't the only use of this. If I were trying to spread expenses that came in by program. Let's say even office supplies, which program that cost was for, I could do it that way. But here it's kind of more traditionally, I'm spreading it out along where that cost belongs, okay? So that I can figure out how much was paid for rent, how much was paid for office supplies. Everybody okay with that? Now, the traditional way to do it in the absence of this would be to write the amount here and then copy it over to whatever is the appropriate column. That's problematic because it's easy to make a mistake. You meant to copy it into utilities and you ended up getting it in the wrong column. So what I'm going to do is show you how this spreads it automatically based on the numbers. See, so I put a number up above for each one of the categories. Okay, so let's just talk about what's in the columns. So in each column is a simple if statement. They're not nested, they're simple. And it basically says this: if this code is a 1, give me this amount. Put the amount in. If it's not, leave it blank. So, for this first item, and I could do a drop down here, but I could have just entered. If I put a 1, it shows up. If I have anything else, it shows blank. So that's the if statement. Now I have the exact same if statement in the second column, except that here it says if it's a 2. Got it? See, basically it's the same formula, except if it's a 2. Want to guess what's over here? Except if it's a 3. Over here, I don't mess it up, except if it's a 4. And here it's a what? It's a 5. Same if statement, it's just based on which column. So watch what happens, and you'll see it. I want to make it big enough that you can see it across, okay? So I go 1, puts it here. I enter 2, puts it here. I enter 3, puts it here. I enter 4, puts it here. I enter 5, puts it here. So it spreads it to the appropriate column based on the number. Now the key in doing this is you create the first one, you make sure it's all right, you make sure it's an absolute value so you don't have to worry about the columns, and then you copy it to the next one, and then you change the 1 to a 2. Then you do the same thing to a 3, the same thing to a 4. Then you test it. Once you test it, then you copy it down. And that's basically how it works. Okay? So you work on your one row, you make sure it's all right, and then you copy it down. Any questions? How many of you have seen something like this before? It's really useful. And not just for the example that I've given, anything where you have to spread data across columns, different buildings, different divisions, different departments, it can work. Okay? So, want to see a little more elegant version? Okay. So here I have to remember the numbers. I've got to have my little chart, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You don't have to do it by numbers. Here, I do it by the categories. So all I did with my drop-down is to put rent, utilities. So the only difference is, in the if statement here, instead of having a number 1, it actually has the word rent in parentheses. Here, utilities in parentheses. Here, office supplies in parentheses. Here, temporary in parentheses. Now, the only thing that I would say is if you're going to do it this way, definitely do a drop-down because spelling counts. Okay? So if you spell utilities wrong, it won't spread it to the column. It's less likely with 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. But if you have the drop-downs, you're not going to have a problem with the spelling. So I absolutely would recommend if you're going to set it up where you're going to use the actual words, okay? Yes, you could do a more sophisticated, because you can use any logical operator. I mean, I haven't done a lot of them, but yeah, you can use a between. That's a logical operator, okay? Of course, that's another one where I had an example of this with very sophisticated. All right, I'll take a minute and talk. So I went into a district, and they had like longevities for folks. So, you know, in addition to your steps, you got, if you had 5 years, you got this, and they had this extremely sophisticated, like, if statement-y type things. And I looked at it and I said, no, I'm going to switch that to VLOOKUP too, okay? So although you could do it, it's another one of those where I probably would prefer that we use a VLOOKUP with not exact, but with estimates. So if I get a chance, I'll show you that. But yes, you can put any logical operator in between. Does that? Okay. Questions? Question? Yeah. So, yeah, this is kind of cool. And it really is not that hard to do. It's not really hard to do. In fact, they're not nested. There's just a lot of them. These are all individual basic if statements. Okay? All right. So I think that we'll call it a day, and I'll see you next time, and we will go over VLOOKUP, so you will learn how to get rid of your nested if statements if you're using them now, and even how to use it to do some betweens. Okay. Thank you. I hope you found this helpful.